I'm Bill Mitchell, and now I'm artistic director of WildWorks Theatre. But for 18 years, I worked with Kneehigh, mainly designing, but designing and directing. Why do I make theatre? It's a very good question. It is one of the life questions, isn't it? Why do you do anything? When I was 8, I realised the only thing I really loved doing was painting, art, pictures. That's what I was. And I went to art school. I did a whole lot of stuff. And actually, the thing that I loved, not necessarily because I love theatre, but the thing I really loved doing was building worlds. I used to make model boxes before that. And there's something about creating your own world, an atmosphere. And then the great thing about theatre is it's transitory, so it disappears. It's ephemeral. That show's gone, and you can build another world, and you can keep building worlds. So I didn't think of myself as a theatre designer. That's what I did. I just really enjoyed making little boxes and putting bits of narrative in. I think quite soon I realised I could express myself quite well in that way. That didn't need words. It didn't need everything else. But it seemed to be a really good form to make things. I mean, since then with my company, and it started with Kneehigh. What I realised, what I was doing, was sort of making films, which I was far more excited about, and going out onto location and working outside on a beach, in a quarry, in a woods. It didn't really matter, but you could go out there and use that as your plaything, and then add things to it. And I don't know, there was just something about that just gave me a lot of meaning. So it took a bit of time to go, well, what's the form that means something to you? How, so yes, you can call it theatre, but I think I create worlds. That's what I like doing. I like directing, and I like designing. If I put all that together in a pie chart of what I do, it would be quite a small V. In fact, I end up doing a lot of writing and designing and particularly sort of at weekends and spare time. It's like that's my hobby, and for the rest of the time you've got to make a company work. You've got to bring in money and have long meetings with people who haven't got quite the same imagination that you have. So I get very frustrated because I think I'm being very clear, and you realise you having to work. You work to other people's imagination. That's your lowest common denominator, guys. The biggest challenge is, whoever you are, whatever theatre you're making, you probably never have quite enough money to do quite what you want. And also, I suppose there is something about Kneehigh being an ensemble that actually helps some of that stuff. You can play around with poor theatre. You can play around with a whole lot of things. I mean, interestingly, I think Kneehigh had a whole load of assets it didn't know it had. You try making an ensemble theatre company where people will just throw their talent in the mix for very little money in London. It just doesn't work. You can't even hold people together, during the day. Somebody will be off to film something, or their agent will call, or whatever. And being at the Barns and being together was such an asset. The shows that meant a lot to me, and we're talking about 18 years worth of me being there, are probably the first Trig Eagle that Mike directed and I worked on. Which I think blew everybody away, because it was so anarchic, because it was so, what a weird way, what a wonderful way of telling a story. I worked on Ship of Fools. I just loved that. We devised it from nothing, and yeah, you could pull it apart, and if I did it again now, it would be very, very different. but there was some wonderful storytelling in it, and wonderful imagery, and it was about death. It was about valuing that, and as part of life. Ghost nets was important to me because it got us out into the landscape really quite crudely, and using that landscape and reading that landscape. I loved red shoes. I love working on red shoes. I think Emma did an incredibly brilliant job on that, and it freed me up as a designer. Interestingly, red shoes. She put me on a whole different aesthetic, I think, really, where we tried to work out what our joint aesthetic was, and tune it. And then Wild Bride and Tristan Isolde. I think those are the things that have been most powerful to me, when I was there, and that I was working on. But my first experience working with Kneehigh, very first experience, was I had a bad back, but I managed to drive down to a field somewhere or another, and I can't remember where it was, where they'd put up a tent and they were running two shows that Mike was directing. And at the moment I arrived in that field, it took me ages to get out of the car because of my bad back. At the same time, Dave Min was being carried on a stretcher past me, and in the spur of the moment, Giles was being thrown into the mix, and so they were working on that. And I'd literally just come off the back of I can't remember now, but it was something like a 35 grand show at the Young Vic, and I walked into this field, and somebody gave me a pot of white paint and a brush and said, "Can you paint that tree white?" Yeah. I could just about do that. And I met Becky, and I met Anna, and I met, all that gang were there and thereabouts. And I just went, this is bonkers, but it's so much fun. And these guys are just making it up, which is exactly what you should be doing. And it was all being driven by enthusiasm, except poor Dave Min, obviously.